Settle in. Let the day fall away from you the way a coat falls from your shoulders when you finally reach home after a long journey. You do not have to carry it any further. Whatever happened today, whatever did not happen, whatever you meant to do and did not, whatever you said and wish you had said differently, all of that can rest now. You have carried it long enough for today. This is a different kind of time. Take a slow breath. Feel your body release, even slightly, the habitual tension it holds without your permission. The shoulders, the jaw, the place behind the eyes where the day accumulates. Let it soften. You do not need to be anywhere other than here. You do not need to be anyone other than who you are. This moment is entirely yours, and it asks nothing of you except your presence. There is a particular quality of thought that visits people in their 40s and 50s. Not always, not every day, but with a frequency that increases with age, and that most people do not speak about because it sits slightly outside the vocabulary of ordinary conversation. It is the thought of the life not lived, the version of your life that might have been, in another set of choices, another set of circumstances, another sequence of doors opened and closed, the career not pursued, the relationship not entered or not left, the place not moved to, the thing you almost did and then did not, for reasons that seemed compelling at the time and that you have been quietly revisiting ever since. This is not quite regret, though it wears regret's clothing. Regret is about a specific decision and its specific consequences. This is something larger and less defined, a sense that grows more insistent with time, that your life has a shape you did not entirely choose, and that somewhere in the space between the life you are living and the life you had imagined, something important has been lost. The Buddha addressed this feeling not by dismissing it as an illusion, though he had much to say about illusion, but by pointing very precisely to what it is, and to what it is not, and to what becomes possible once the distinction is clearly seen. He addressed it in his teaching on the middle way, and in his teaching on attachment, and in his teaching on the nature of the self that does the imagining. He addressed it above all in his insistence that the moment of awakening, the moment of genuine contact with your own life, is always now, never in the past and never in a future in which the better version of your story has finally come to pass. This is a story about a woman named Margaret, who spent a great deal of her life being very good at the wrong things. Not wrong in any absolute sense. The things she was good at were genuinely useful, genuinely valued, genuinely important to the people around her. But wrong in the specific sense that they were not quite hers, that she had arrived at them through a series of reasonable adjustments to other people's expectations, and that somewhere in the long process of being good at what was required of her, she had lost track of what she would have chosen if she had believed at the crucial moments that choosing was something she was allowed to do. She was 56 when she began to look at this clearly. Not in a crisis. There was no single dramatic event, no collapse, no loss that forced the reckoning. It arrived, as many of the most important reckonings do, quietly, in the ordinary run of a Tuesday afternoon, when she was sitting at her desk doing work that she was very good at and that meant absolutely nothing to her. And she became aware, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that she had been doing this for 23 years. Margaret had grown up the eldest of 4 children in a family where the practical needs were always more present than the aspirational ones. Her parents were good people, hardworking, reliable, genuinely devoted to the children in the ways that counted. But they were people for whom dreams were a luxury that circumstances had not yet afforded. And the message she absorbed, not explicitly but thoroughly, was that the serious business of life was to be managed competently and without too much fuss, and that the things one might have wanted in a more indulgent life were something to be deferred until the conditions were more favorable. The conditions were never quite favorable. There was always another responsibility, another obligation, another reason why this was not quite the right time for the thing she had been deferring. She deferred a move she had always wanted to make, to somewhere with water, with light, with a different quality of air, because her parents were aging and her children were young, and the timing was never right. She deferred the writing she had always wanted to do, not a career, just the private practice of putting sentences together in a way that felt true, because the day was always full of other things, and the tiredness at the end of it was real and genuine, and left very little room for anything that required the particular quality of attention that honest writing demands. She deferred, repeatedly and with what felt like good reason each time, the question of what she actually wanted, because there was always something more immediately pressing that wanted her attention first. And then she was 56, sitting at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon, and the question was no longer possible to defer. It arrived not as a crisis, but as a stillness. A sudden and unexpected absence of the usual noise inside her head, the running list, the perpetual task management, the low-level anxiety that had been the background texture of her interior life for so long she had stopped noticing it. In that stillness, something very quiet and very clear made itself heard. This is not your life. Or rather, this is your life, exactly as it is, and you have been somewhere else inside it for a very long time. She sat with this for a while. She did not react immediately, which was unusual for her, because she was someone who prided herself on action, on managing situations, on finding the practical response to whatever arose. She simply sat with it, in the stillness that had come from nowhere, and that she somehow understood she should not disturb. She did not immediately know what to do with what she had heard. She had no framework for it, no prior experience with this particular quality of interior reckoning. She was, in most of the ways that mattered to the outside world, a successful and capable woman, a project manager for a large organization, someone whose competence was relied upon by many people, someone who kept things moving that would have stopped without her. This was not nothing. But it was not, she understood in that Tuesday stillness, the thing she would have chosen. Her daughter had been meditating for some years and had mentioned more than once a teacher she found valuable, an older woman who taught in a Buddhist tradition and whose approach Margaret had absorbed only vaguely through second-hand accounts, in the way you absorb information about things you are not yet ready to encounter directly. After the Tuesday afternoon, she asked her daughter for more details. She listened. She looked up the teacher. She enrolled in a weekend retreat. The teacher's name was Frances, a woman in her mid-70s, small and precise, with the quality of stillness that Margaret would come to associate with people who have been practicing for a very long time. She did not offer comfort immediately. She offered something that Margaret, who had spent her adult life being offered solutions, found initially disconcerting and eventually invaluable. She offered a more precise way of seeing the problem. In the first session of the retreat, Frances said something that Margaret wrote down and kept. The suffering of the unlived life is not at its root about the specific choices you did not make. It is about the belief, held deeply, rarely examined, that your life would have been more yours if the circumstances had been different. That there is a version of you in a different set of conditions who is finally, fully, actually alive. This belief is the source of a particular kind of suffering that is extremely common and extremely difficult to address because it feels so reasonable. Because the alternative life you are grieving is always more vivid and more real feeling than the actual life you are living. Because it has never had to encounter reality. Margaret sat with this and felt the truth of it in the specific way that things ring true when they name something you have been experiencing without the words for it. The alternative life she had been maintaining in her imagination, the one in the house near water, with the writing and the different quality of attention to her own days, had indeed never had to encounter reality. It was permanently available as a more beautiful version of her life, precisely because it had never been tested by the actual conditions of living. Frances continued. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from craving, from the insistence that things should be other than they are. He was not teaching passivity. He was not saying that the wish for things to be different is wrong, or that effort and aspiration are contrary to the Dharma. He was making a more specific point, that the suffering is not in the difference between what is and what might be, but in the relationship to that difference. The mind that insists the difference is evidence of a failed life is suffering. The mind that can hold the difference with curiosity, with compassion, with the understanding that every life is a collection of chosen and unchosen things, and that wisdom lies in knowing the difference between them. That mind can be at peace, even with the genuine losses that every life contains. She asked Margaret gently in the small group discussion that followed, "When you imagine the life you did not live, what is the quality you are actually missing? Not the specific elements, not the water or the writing or the different circumstances, but the quality, the feeling of it. What is it that you believe would be present in that life that is absent from this one?" Margaret thought for a long time. The group was quiet, holding the question with her in the way of people who are practicing the art of patient attention. And what she found at the center of the imagined life was not the water or the writing or even the freedom, though all of those things were genuinely there. What she found was the feeling of being present, of being actually inside her life rather than managing it from a slight distance, of being, in the word that her daughter used that Margaret had always found faintly mysterious, awake. Frances nodded when Margaret said this. She said, "So the thing you are missing is not in the other life. It is in the quality of attention you would bring to any life if you believed you were allowed to bring it. And that quality of attention is available right now, in this life, with no circumstances changed, if you are willing to stop waiting for the conditions to be right before you inhabit what is already here." This was not a comfortable thing to hear. Margaret had been, in some important sense, waiting for the conditions to be right for most of her adult life. The idea that the waiting was itself the problem, that the deferred life was not being prevented by circumstances, but by a deeply held belief that she had not yet earned the right to be fully present in her own days, was something that required a considerable amount of sitting with before it could be received properly. She sat with it through the rest of the retreat. She sat with it in the morning meditations, which Frances led with the particular combination of precision and warmth that Margaret came to find deeply trustworthy. She sat with it during the walks between sessions, through grounds that were beautiful in the specific, understated way of places where people have been practicing attention for a long time, and the attention has somehow accumulated in the landscape. She sat with it in the evenings, when the sitting practice was supplemented by the simple and radical instruction to do nothing. Not read, not plan, not organize the next day. Simply be in the room with whatever arose. What arose on the third evening was grief. Not the diffuse, generalized sadness she had associated with the unlived life, but something cleaner and more specific. The grief of the actual losses within the life she had lived. Her father's death, which she had managed with great competence and very little feeling, because there had been so much to manage, and the feeling had seemed like something she could return to later. The end of a friendship that had mattered enormously, and had dissolved slowly under the accumulating weight of distance and neglect, neither party quite deciding to let it go, both of them simply not finding the energy to maintain it. The years of her children's early childhood, which had been exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, and which she had gotten through rather than been present for, and which she now mourned with the particular ache of someone who understands too late that the exhaustion was a gift she did not have the attention to receive. She sat with these losses in the way the practice instructed, not suppressing them, not analyzing them, not moving quickly toward resolution, simply feeling them with the full quality of attention that she had been deferring for a great many years. She cried, which was unusual for her. The crying was not dramatic or prolonged. It was quiet and thorough, the way rain is sometimes quiet and thorough. And when it was over, she felt different in a way that was difficult to describe, but that had something to do with being more present in her own body than she had been in a long time. Frances, when Margaret described this in the final session, said, "Grief that has been waiting is always looking for permission. You gave it permission. That is not a small thing. And what you will find, if you continue to give it permission to move through when it arises, rather than managing it back into its place, is that it leaves space in its wake. Not emptiness, space. The space that has been occupied by the management of the unfelt becomes available for something else." Margaret asked what she should do. The question was reflexive. She was someone who always moved from understanding to action as quickly as possible. But she was beginning to notice the reflex and to hold it a little more lightly. Frances said, "Do less than you think you need to do." The impulse to immediately translate insight into a program of self-improvement is itself part of what you are working with. Begin with this. Once a day, for as long as you can manage, give your full attention to whatever you are actually doing. Not planning the next thing, not reviewing the previous thing. Simply this, now, whatever it is. Washing the dishes, walking to the car, speaking to your daughter. Full attention, for as long as you can sustain it before the mind goes somewhere else. And when it goes somewhere else, bring it back, without judgment, without the story about why it went. Just bring it back. That is the practice. That is where everything starts. She drove home from the retreat on a Sunday afternoon in early autumn, through countryside that was doing what countryside does in that season, going gold and amber and rust, the light falling at the particular angle that only happens in autumn, and that makes everything look both beautiful and briefly elegiac, as though the world is acknowledging its own impermanence with more grace than most of us manage. She drove slowly, which was not her habit, and she looked at the fields and the trees and the light on them, and she was, for stretches of 10 and 15 minutes at a time, simply there, present, in the car, in the afternoon, in the autumn light, with no particular destination in her head beyond the one she was already moving toward. She thought about what Francis had said about the unlived life. She thought about the quality she had been missing, the presence, the wakefulness, the sense of actually inhabiting her own days. And she thought about Francis's observation that this quality was not in the other life, but in the attention she would bring to any life. She tested this experimentally as she drove. She brought attention to the steering wheel under her hands, the sound of the tires on the road, the smell of the car in the autumn warmth, the quality of the light through the windscreen. Small things. Present things, things that were actually here. They were, she found, more than sufficient. The present, when she was actually in it rather than somewhere else inside it, was richer than she had remembered. Or perhaps she had never remembered it properly, because she had so rarely been in it fully. She arrived home, she made tea, she sat in the garden in the last of the afternoon light, and she was there. In the garden, in the chair, in this life, with no other life required. The garden was not the garden near the water that she had deferred. It was this garden, with its specific plants and its specific light and its specific quality of quiet, which was the quiet of a life that had been lived here, in this place, with these people. It was, she thought, considerably more beautiful than she had noticed. She sat in the garden until the light went. Then she went inside. The months that followed were not a transformation. They were a practice, with all the uneven texture that genuine practice has. Days of genuine presence, interrupted by days of complete absorption, back into the old patterns of management and deferral, the mind running ahead to the next task before the current one was done. The interior commentary never fully quiet, the habit of not quite being here, reasserting itself with the persistence of something that has had a very long time to establish itself. She did not become someone who had no regrets. She did not stop thinking about the life she had not lived. She did not cease to feel, occasionally, the particular ache of choices not made and doors not opened. But the relationship to all of that changed, slowly and verifiably, in the way that Francis had described and that she had not quite believed was possible until she experienced it herself. The unlived life became less of an accusation and more of a sadness, real, acknowledged, held with the kind of compassion she was learning to extend to herself. The regret became less of an indictment of the life she had actually lived, and more of an honest recognition that every life contains genuine loss, and that the losses are worth grieving, and that grieving them properly, fully, without management, without the rush toward resolution, is one of the ways in which a life becomes more fully itself, rather than less. She began to write. Not in the dramatic sense of the deferred ambition suddenly fulfilled. There was no novel, no memoir, no public writing of any kind. She simply bought a notebook and began to write in it each morning, for 20 minutes, whatever was there. Not literature, not even very good writing much of the time. Simply the practice of putting sentences together in a way that felt honest. The same practice she had been deferring for 30 years, begun finally not because the conditions were right, but because she had stopped requiring the conditions to be right before she allowed herself to do it. Her daughter noticed the change before she said anything about it. She said at dinner one evening, without particular ceremony, "You seem more yourself lately." Margaret thought about this for a long time. More herself. As though there had been a self somewhere underneath the management and the competence and the deferred life, waiting with the patience of things that do not require acknowledgement to continue existing, and that was now, slowly and imperfectly, and for the first time in a long time, being given a little room. She thought about what Francis had said: the moment of awakening is always now, never in the past and never in a future in which the better version of your story has finally come to pass. She thought about the autumn drive home and the garden in the last light. She thought about the notebook on the table beside her bed, with its ordinary sentences and its honest, small observations, unglamorous and entirely hers. She thought, this is it, not the other life. This one, the one that has been here all along, asking only to be inhabited rather than managed, asking only to be met with the quality of attention that she had been saving for a version of herself that was finally properly ready. She was ready now. Or she was not ready, and it did not matter, because the readiness was not a precondition for the arriving. The arriving was itself the readiness. The stepping into the ordinary minutes of the actual day, the tea and the garden and the light and the notebook, that was it. There was not something more. There was not something better around the corner of a different set of choices. There was this, and the quality of attention you brought to it, and the practice of bringing it again when it wandered, and again when it wandered again, for the rest of your days. Which is, the Buddha taught, not a diminishment, but an arrival. If you are somewhere in your 40s or 50s or beyond, and you know the particular weight of the life you did not live, if you carry it quietly in the background of your days, as a standard against which the actual life is perpetually found slightly wanting, then this story is for you. The Buddhist teaching does not ask you to abandon the wish for things to have been different. It does not ask you to pretend that the losses within your life are not real, or that the choices not made were not choices, or that the thing you deferred for 30 years and are only beginning now does not come with its own specific quality of ache. All of that is real. It deserves to be acknowledged, felt, honored, grieved properly and without rush. What the teaching offers, in addition to that acknowledgement, is a reorientation, a different question to bring to the life you are actually in. Not, why is this not the life I imagined? But, what is here in this life that I have not yet been fully present for? Not, what did I lose? But, what is available right now in the actual conditions of my actual days, if I bring to it the quality of attention I have been saving for a better time? The better time is this time. The life worth inhabiting is this one. The self that was waiting for the conditions to be right has been here all along, has been the one getting up each morning and managing the days with such competence, and is available right now. Not in the other life, not in the better circumstances, not after the things that need to change have changed, but here, in the next 10 minutes, in whatever ordinary thing is in front of you. Be in it, fully, for as long as you can before the mind goes somewhere else. And when it goes, bring it back. That is the practice. That is all the practice is. And that practice, sustained over days and then months and then years, is what Margaret found, what the Buddha pointed toward, what has been available to human beings in every set of circumstances, in every life, in every ordinary Tuesday afternoon that has ever simply been what it was, without apology, without improvement, without the other life that was always going to be more fully itself. This is your life. It has been here all along. May you find it. May you be in it. May you discover in the specific texture of your own ordinary days more than you had imagined was there. And may you rest tonight, not in the life you might have had, but in the life you are in, which is, when you are fully present for it, considerably more than enough. Rest now. You are here. That is the whole thing. That has always been the whole thing. There is something else the Buddhist teaching offers to those of us at midlife that is worth sitting with before we close, because it addresses directly the particular quality of suffering that the unlived life produces, a suffering that is different in kind from the other suffering the teachings address, and that requires a slightly different angle of approach. The suffering of loss, the suffering of anger, the suffering of self-criticism. These are all forms of pain that have a clear object. Something happened, or is happening, or is being done to oneself, and the pain arises from that specific thing. The practice in each of these cases is to be with the pain clearly, to see it for what it is, to change the relationship to it without requiring it to disappear. The suffering of the unlived life is subtly different. Its object is not something that happened, but something that did not happen. A negative space, an absence, a path not taken. And the mind that is suffering from it is, in an important sense, suffering from its own imagination. The other life that serves as the implicit standard against which this life is found wanting is not a real life. It is a construction, elaborate, vivid, internally consistent, emotionally compelling, and entirely hypothetical. It has never had to be tested by Monday mornings, by the specific limitations of the self that would have lived it, by the ordinary friction of actual days in actual conditions. It is, in the most technical sense, a fantasy, not in the dismissive way that word is sometimes used, but in the precise sense of something generated entirely within the mind and not constrained by external reality. The Buddha's teaching on the nature of mind is relevant here in a way that is not always obvious. He taught that the mind is extraordinarily creative, that it generates experience constantly, moment by moment, and that much of what we take to be perception is, in fact, construction. We do not simply receive the world. We actively make it from the raw material of sensation and the organizing structures of our habits of thought and the stories we have been telling about ourselves and our lives for as long as we can remember. The unlived life is one of these constructions, a very skilled one, refined over many years, maintained with great care. And the insight that Francis was offering Margaret, the insight that the teaching points toward, is not that the construction is unreal in the sense of unimportant. The losses it represents are real losses. The choices it points toward that were not made are real choices that were not made. The ache of it is real aching. But the construction itself, the specific imagined life that is always more vivid and more present than the actual one, is something the mind is doing. And what the mind is doing, the mind can also see. And what the mind can see, it can begin to hold differently. This is the practice of Vipassana, the insight meditation, at its most direct application to midlife experience. You sit and you observe the mind's activity, and you begin to see the unlived life not as an objective fact about what your life should have been, but as a story the mind has been generating, refined and maintained and returned to with remarkable consistency over many years, in the service of a belief, never quite examined, never quite named, that the life actually lived is insufficient, and that somewhere in a different set of circumstances, the real life was waiting. When you can see it as a story, not to dismiss it, but simply to recognize its nature, something shifts. The story is still there. The ache is still there. The genuine losses within the actual life are still there and still real. But the story is now something you are observing rather than something you are inside. And from outside it, even briefly, you can see something you cannot see from within it, that the actual life, the one that has been here all along, the one you have been managing and getting through and deferring the real living of until the conditions improved, that actual life is also a story. And it is a story you have significantly more power to shape than the one you have been mourning. Not by changing the circumstances, not by making the choices that were not made, not by somehow arriving at the life that was deferred, but by changing the quality of attention you bring to the life that is actually here. by beginning in whatever small way is available today, to inhabit rather than manage, to be present rather than planning, to bring the full quality of yourself to the actual minutes of the actual day, rather than holding that quality in reserve for the better version of your story that is always just around the corner of a different set of decisions. Margaret began to do this with the notebook, 20 minutes each morning before the day's management began. It was a small thing. It was entirely ordinary. No one knew about it except her daughter, who asked once with genuine curiosity and then let it rest. It did not change Margaret's life in any dramatic or visible way. The work was still the work. The responsibilities were still the responsibilities. The things she had deferred were still, many of them, deferred, because the timing was still not quite right, and the conditions were still not quite favorable, and the life that would have been easier to inhabit was still theoretical. But something had changed in her relationship to all of it. The 20 minutes of notebook each morning were 20 minutes of being fully in her own experience, of being the person she actually was, in the life she was actually living, with the specific quality of attention she had been saving for a more worthy occasion. And in those 20 minutes, the life felt different. Not better in any circumstance-based sense, but more itself, more actually her own, more like the thing she had been waiting to inhabit, rather than the holding pattern she had been managing until the real living could begin. She understood over time that this was not a small thing, that the 20 minutes were not a consolation prize for the life not lived, but the beginning of the actual practice of living. That presence is not a state you achieve when the conditions are right, but a capacity you develop by practicing it in the conditions that are actually available. That the notebook, the garden, the autumn drive, the daughter at dinner saying you seem more yourself, these were not lesser versions of the vivid imagined life, but the actual texture of the life that was hers, available to be inhabited fully, only when she stopped requiring it to be otherwise, before she allowed herself to be in it. The Buddha's most fundamental teaching, the one that underlies everything else, the one that the entire apparatus of practice is in service of making real for the practitioner, is simply this: you are already here. Not the improved version of you, not the you who has finally made the right choices and arrived at the right circumstances, not the you of the life that was deferred. The awareness that is reading these words, the presence that is in this room, in this moment, the quality of knowing that has been with you through every version of your life, that is already here, already whole, already the ground of everything you have been searching for. The practice is not to become that. The practice is to recognize it, to stop looking for it in a different set of circumstances, or a better version of your story, or a life that was never lived but was always in the imagination more fully alive. To look instead at what is here, to bring to it the quality of attention it has always deserved, and has been waiting with infinite patience for you to finally offer. That attention, the full, honest, unmanaged quality of being genuinely present in your own life, is what Margaret was beginning to offer, 20 minutes at a time, in an ordinary notebook, on an ordinary morning, in a life that was by most measures not the one she would have chosen, and that was, with attention, more than sufficient. More than sufficient. If you are 40 or 50 or 60, or anywhere in the territory between the life you imagined and the life you are in, if the distance between those two things has been a source of quiet pain for a long time, then the invitation from this story and from the teaching it draws on is simply this: stop waiting. Not stop hoping, not stop caring about what you do with the time that remains, not stop attending to the things that actually matter to you and that you have been putting off. Simply stop waiting for the conditions to be right before you allow yourself to be fully in your own days. The conditions will not be right. They never are for long. The life will not arrive at the version that feels fully ready to be inhabited. The better circumstances will come in some ways and not others, and the self that encounters them will have its own new set of reasons to wait a little longer. The practice is to begin here, with what is here, with the specific texture of this day, this room, this breath, this life that is yours and that has been asking more patiently than you know for your full presence. You have been good at many things. You have managed a great deal with great competence. The people around you have depended on you, and you have not let them down. All of that is real and not nothing. But you are also the person with the notebook on the bedside table, with the thing you have been meaning to do, with the quality of attention that has been waiting for a worthy occasion to receive it, with the life that is actually here, in all its imperfection and specificity and irreplaceable particularity. That life is worthy of your full presence. It has always been worthy of your full presence. Begin now. The present moment is the only moment available, and it is, as it turns out, entirely enough. May you find your way into your own days. May the distance between the life you imagined and the life you are in become, in time, less of a wound and more of a teacher. May you bring to the actual texture of your actual life the quality of attention that the imagined life has been receiving all these years. And may you discover, as Margaret discovered in a garden in the last of the autumn light, that the life that was here all along was considerably more than you had noticed, and that noticing it, finally and fully, is not too late. It is never too late. The present moment is always here, and it is always enough. Rest now. One more thing before we rest completely. Frances had a way of ending each session of the retreat with a short period of metta practice, loving-kindness meditation, directed as the tradition prescribes, first toward oneself and then in widening circles toward others. She did it quietly, without ceremony, offering the traditional phrases in the unhurried way of someone who had said them many times and found them each time inexhaustible. May I be happy. May I be well. May I be safe. May I be at peace. Margaret had found this difficult at the beginning of the retreat, the same difficulty Clara had found in an earlier story, the same hollowness when the phrases were directed inward, the same sense that the words did not quite fit the shape of what she believed about herself. But by the fourth and fifth day, something had shifted. Not that the phrases had become easy, or that the resistance had entirely disappeared, but the grief she had sat with on the third evening had cleared something, made some space, as Frances had said grief would, and in that space, the phrases had begun to land a little differently. Not as claims about a condition she had not yet achieved, but as intentions, as direction, as the mind turning itself deliberately and with effort and imperfectly toward its own well-being. May I be happy, not when the circumstances are better, not in the other life. Now, in this one, as the person I am, in the conditions I am in, with the history I have and the choices I made, and the 20 minutes of notebook in the morning, and the garden in the autumn light. May I be well, not the improved version, this one. May I be safe, even in the uncertainty of not knowing what comes next, even in the discomfort of the life unlived that is still there and still real, even in the honest acknowledgement of genuine loss. May I be safe, which is to say, may I know that the ground beneath me is solid, that the awareness in which all of this is happening is stable and spacious, and not at risk from any of the weather that moves through it. May I be at peace. Not the peace that requires everything to be resolved, the peace that is available in the midst of the unresolved, when the quality of attention is fully here rather than somewhere else. Frances then extended the practice outward, as the tradition does, to the others in the room, to people Margaret loved, to people she found difficult, to people she had never met, to all beings everywhere, without exception. And Margaret practiced this, awkwardly at first, and then with increasing ease, finding in the outward extension of goodwill a kind of relief from the self-directedness of the earlier part of the practice, a release into something larger than the particular story of one person's particular unlived life. She remembered this practice on the drive home through the autumn countryside. She practiced it quietly, without closing her eyes, directed at the landscape passing outside the window, the fields and the trees and the occasional farm, and the people in the occasional village going about their Saturday morning in ways she would never know anything about. May you be happy. May you be well. May you be safe. May you be at peace. It felt, she thought, like something real, like a quality of attention that was genuinely different from her ordinary way of moving through the world, which was organized primarily around management and efficiency and the getting of things done. This was something else, a kind of care that cost nothing and asked nothing in return, and was directed at people she would never speak to and who would never know she had offered it. And it made her feel, for stretches of 10 and 15 minutes, genuinely warm, not in a sentimental way, but in the deep and quiet way of someone who has remembered something they had forgotten they knew. She practiced it in the garden. She practiced it in the supermarket, directed at the other shoppers with their own carts and their own Saturday morning lives and their own specific unlived versions of themselves. She practiced it imperfectly, inconsistently, with long gaps in which the management reasserted itself and the meta was forgotten. And she returned to it when she remembered, without judgment, without the story about how she should have been more consistent, simply returning, the way the practice always asks you to return, to here, to now, to the quality of attention that is available in this moment and no other. This is the practice. This is all the practice is. The returning, again and again, to here. And here, when you are fully in it, when the quality of attention is genuinely present rather than somewhere in the imagined better version of your story, is not a lesser place than you had hoped for. It is not the consolation prize. It is not the life you settled for. It is your life, the only one there is. And it is, right now, in this breath, in this moment, waiting for you to arrive in it. You can arrive now. There is room. There has always been room. Welcome home. The question that Francis asked Margaret in that first retreat session, what is the quality you are actually missing from the life you did not live, is worth returning to now as we close, because it is a question that can be asked at any age and in any circumstances, and that tends, when asked honestly and held patiently, to reveal something important about where the actual practice needs to happen. Because the answer is never, when you look at it carefully, the specific elements of the imagined life. It is never really the house near the water, or the different career, or the relationship that was not entered, or the place that was not moved to. It is always underneath those specifics, a quality, a way of being in one's own experience, a quality of presence, or freedom, or aliveness, or creative engagement, or deep rest, or genuine connection, something that the imagined life represents, but does not in itself contain. And the discovery that the teaching is always pointing toward is that this quality, whatever specific form it takes in the particular unlived life that a particular person has been carrying, is not located in the circumstances. It is located in the quality of attention. It is available right now in the conditions that actually exist, in the life that is actually here, without any change of circumstance required. Not without effort, not without practice, not without the long, unglamorous, day-by-day work of choosing to be here rather than somewhere better, but without the conditions needing to be different first. This is what Margaret found in the garden. This is what the 20 minutes of notebook each morning were giving her. This is what Francis was pointing toward when she said that the suffering of the unlived life is not about the specific choices not made, but about the belief that full presence was contingent on circumstances that had not yet arrived. The circumstances will never all arrive. There will always be something not quite right about the conditions, something that would be easier in a different configuration, some way in which the life you are in fails to match the life you had imagined. That gap between the imagined and the actual is not a problem to be solved. It is simply the condition of being human, of having an imagination capable of generating possibilities far beyond what any single life can contain, and of being in a specific life with specific constraints and specific gifts that no other life would have had. The practice is not to close the gap. The practice is to stop giving the gap the power to prevent you from being fully in the life that is here. To notice when you are on the other side of the glass, managing from a distance, saving the quality of your presence for conditions that are not yet available, and to choose in that moment to come back, to be here, in this kitchen, this garden, this office, this conversation, this perfectly ordinary and entirely sufficient Tuesday afternoon. The Buddha's teaching on the middle way is relevant here in a way that is not always recognized in discussions of midlife and the unlived life. The middle way, his teaching that the path of wisdom lies between the extremes of indulgence and austerity, is usually understood in terms of physical or sensory experience. But it applies equally to the experience of the imagination. The extreme of indulging the unlived life, spending great quantities of interior energy in the maintenance and elaboration of the alternative, is one form of suffering. The extreme of forcibly suppressing it, denying the genuine losses it represents, insisting that everything is fine and that there is nothing to grieve, is another. The middle way is to acknowledge the imagined life honestly, to grieve the genuine losses within it with genuine care, and then to return, always to return, to the actual life, which is the only one available, and which is, when met with full attention, considerably more than it appeared to be from inside the management. Margaret is still writing in her notebook. Not every morning. There are still mornings when the day begins before she has had the time, and other mornings when the energy is simply not there. But most mornings, 20 minutes, whatever is there. She has filled 4 notebooks now, none of which she has ever read back, because the practice is not about the product. The practice is about the 20 minutes of being fully in her own experience, of being the self that was waiting underneath the management and the competence and the careful adjustment to other people's expectations, of giving that self 20 minutes each morning before the day requires anything else from her. She told her daughter once, asked directly and with genuine curiosity what she had gotten from all of it, the retreat, the practice, the notebooks, the conversation with Francis that had taken on the quality of a recurring imagined dialogue, rather than a literal ongoing relationship, since Francis had retired from public teaching. She told her daughter, "I think what I got was permission. Permission to be in my own life. Permission to bring the full quality of myself to the ordinary minutes of the actual day, rather than saving it for something more worthy. Permission to stop waiting." Her daughter was quiet for a moment, and then said something that Margaret thought she would carry for a long time. "I think that's what most people are waiting for. Someone to tell them they're allowed. You are allowed. Whatever you have been deferring, whatever quality of presence or engagement or honest attention you have been saving for the life that was going to be more worthy of it, you are allowed to bring it here. To this life, as it actually is, in the conditions that actually exist. With the self that is actually here, which is not the improved version, and not the version that has finally gotten it right, but the version that is present, available, capable of full attention, and worthy of its own care. You are allowed to begin. Not when you are ready, not when the conditions improve, not when the unlived life has been properly mourned, and the gap has been properly closed, and you have arrived at some final understanding of why things went the way they did, rather than the way you imagined. Now, here, in this breath, in the 20 minutes before the day begins, in the garden in the last light, in the car on the drive home through the autumn countryside, in the ordinary notebook on the ordinary morning, in the ordinary kitchen of the ordinary and entirely sufficient life that is yours. It has been yours all along. May you know that tonight. May you rest in it. May you wake tomorrow and bring to the first minute of the actual day the quality of attention you have been saving for a better occasion. This is the better occasion. This moment, right now, is the better occasion. It always has been. Welcome home. Rest now.